So what's your name?
Hi, I'm Tena Lustig.
When and where were you born?
Newport News or Hampton, Virginia, I'm not sure. The hospital was Mary Immaculate, but they moved it since I was born, so I can't really tell you what city I was born in.
When were you born?
January 1st, 1968.
Do you know the time?
8:10, and I was the third person born in Virginia. In that hospital, when I was in college, I met a suite mate who was the fourth person born in that hospital, and we were delivered by the same doctor. My parents were Mary and Hubert Williamson, and we had a great life. They're both very different, but they complement each other very well. My dad is very gentle and loving, and I have memories of just crawling up in his lap and him singing certain hymns to me, particular ones. How Great Thou Art was one. And if I had a stomachache, he would rub my stomachache away, and he actually could. And my mother is very generous. And to a fault. So if someone needed something, she was there. If she saw something that she liked, that she thought we would like, she would buy it without us having to ask for it. And one of my favorite memories with her is that every Saturday, she and my sister and I would spend the morning cleaning the house, and then we would go out to lunch at the Sword and Kilt restaurant at Tolheimer's at Coliseum Mall, and then we would shop. And that was something we could count on pretty much every Saturday.
Who were your best friends as a young kid?
Jeannie Blankenship, and we lived on the water. And I had a sailboat, and she lived right down the creek on the water, and she had a sailboat. And after school, we would both go home, and we would get in our sailboats, and we would meet each other in the middle of the river and just paddle around and race our sailboats and set out crab nets. And this was before parents wouldn't let children go out of their backyards. You know, our parents were at work, and they were not worried about us drowning, and that was wonderful.
Aside from the sailboats and life-endangering situations, what kind of things were you into as a younger kid, before you were a teenager?
Before I was a teenager, I danced a little, and I was a cheerleader from a very young age for Little League. Enjoyed that during football season. And I'd say just playing kickball in the cul-de-sac with all the neighborhood kids.
What was it like growing up with Rita as a sister?
Oh, Rita is the best sister in the world. And if I could have handpicked her, I would have. And some of my favorite memories of Rita are, she's 9 years older than me. We each had our own bedrooms. But she wasn't really a fan of going to school and hated to study. So I would help her study by getting her notes and asking her questions, and she would, answer the questions, and I had the key, so I knew if the answer was right or not. And after, she had a black light in her room, and she would turn on the black light, and we would listen to ELO together, Electric Light Orchestra. And I would ask her if I could sleep in her bed with her every night. And most of the time she said yes, but not always.
When did you find out there was no Easter Bunny or Santa Claus?
I still believe in the Easter Bunny, and here's why. So it was Easter night, and I was asleep, and I had to get up to go to the bathroom. And I opened my bathroom door, and there was a 6-foot bunny standing at my door. And I immediately got back in the bed so that he would think I was asleep, and covered up and pretended to be asleep. And he came in and pulled the covers back and made sure I was sleeping, and then shut the door. And I waited about 5 minutes and got up, and the bunny was in my room. So I'm pretty sure there's an Easter Bunny.
What about Santa?
I figured out Santa pretty early. I'm very logical, and I just didn't see how a fat man could fit down a chimney and get back out without help.
Who was your first crush, or when was your first crush?
My first crush was in the summer of 8th grade. I'm sure I had crushes when I was younger than that, but I don't remember the people's names. But his name was Andy Kozowitz, and he was gorgeous. And he lived, fortunately, right around the corner from my sister. And so I loved to come to her house and help her with her kids, or not. And I would just go for a walk, and 5 minutes later I was at Andy Kozowitz's house. So I had a good excuse to go visit my sister, and got to see him to boot. And we're still friends as adults, Facebook friends. We don't see each other except at high school reunions now every 10 years. But he was definitely my first crush. And my first kiss.
What was your first job?
My first job was at Daryl's Restaurant, which is now out of business. However, I also worked at their sister restaurant. I worked at like 4 Daryl's. Newport News, Durham when I was in college, I think another one somewhere, and then when I lived in New York, just barely surviving on my salary, I worked at a restaurant called Houlihan's, which is the same thing as Daryl's, same menu, but for whatever reason they call it Houlihan's there. My first car was a red Honda Prelude, and I got it as a gift from my parents for graduation from high school. And I wrecked it probably 6 times. Yes, I had a pretty well-rounded experience at high school. I was a decent student, good enough to not put in a lot of effort and still get decent grades. So I got my homework done, I guess, but I didn't spend hours studying. Of course, back then, the curriculum was nowhere near as rigorous as it is now, and my grades would not have been what they are now. I was a cheerleader, captain or co-captain 3 of the 4 years. As I said, I was a singer. I was in show choir. I did, musicals at school. I was involved in FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, even though most people don't consider cheerleading an athletic sport. It does require some training and endurance. So I think just a combination of not stressing out about academics and doing things that I really enjoyed at school kept me interested. The sad part about that was because I thought that I was so well-rounded and that my grades would get me in wherever I wanted to go. I applied to 3 schools, and didn't get accepted to any of them. And that was very disappointing, as in my senior year, as all my friends were getting letters from schools saying that they, were going here or there, and suddenly I had nowhere to go. And clearly I set my sights too high. I applied to UVA, UNC, and I don't even remember where the third one was, but there was no way I was getting into these schools with my grades. But I just figured, hey, I got the whole package. I'll get in. But God had a different plan. So my mom drove me up to VCU one day, and she demanded that we see the dean of the honors program. And somehow we left his office, and I was in the honors program. He suggested that I try out for a voice scholarship, and I got a voice scholarship. And I ended up in a very nice and prestigious dorm that is very difficult to get in. And I ended up loving the experience. I was there for 2 years, changed majors to radio, TV, and film, and graduated from UNC. Two completely different experiences. I loved both of them, and it worked out. I mean, if I could pick how I would have wanted it to work out, I would have picked that way, but it didn't seem like it was going to go that way, and I consider that just providential. I met my husband Jay in high school, and each year our school had 3 or 4 exchange students, and I was always very interested in the exchange student group. And so this blonde-haired, blue-eyed Dutchman comes to my high school, and I thought he was really cute. I actually had a boyfriend at the time. I dated a boy from a close-by high school for 5 years. But anyway, he was really cute. Had a cute little accent and whatever. So one of his friends in high school, he told that he liked me and wanted to go to homecoming with me, but he was afraid to ask me to homecoming. So he sent his friend over. He was a senior now. We're not talking about the 7th grade. And he sent his friend over to ask that if he asked me to homecoming, would I go? I thought that was a little bit odd, but cute in a shy sort of way. So I said, sure, I'll go with him. So he did come and ask me to the homecoming, and we went. And I think the only 2 sentences that were spoken the entire night was, "You look nice," and "I had a good time." I don't remember him saying anything else. But somehow we did have a good time. So after that, he loosened up a little bit. We became friends. And we had lunch together, and he played soccer for our school team. And at one point in the year, when we were closer and we were friends, he broke his knee, and so he couldn't put his shoes on in the morning because he, like me, has no flexibility and could not reach his foot. So I would drive to his house every morning and put his shoes on. And we would go to school together and whatever. So he stayed at school in Tab for like 9 or 10 months. And he came over on his last day to say goodbye. And he kissed me on the way to the airport, which I had mixed feelings about. I appreciated the fact that he didn't rush into anything. Certainly waiting a year to kiss someone is not rushing. But it irritated me that he kissed me on the last day, because you kiss someone, suddenly you have this connection, and then they take off. So he left, went home. They go to school longer in Holland. So he went into his senior year at his high school in Holland. And the next summer was my senior trip. And we went to Nag's Head, and he was there. And so I saw him. We hung out a lot. And at that point, we realized there was really something there. But he lived in Europe, I lived here, this was pre-cell phone. So we were pen pals for 7 years. And in, I think, 89, he showed back up. And I was in bed. It was a Sunday morning. And I kept hearing something tapping on my window, and it was annoying me. And I look outside, and there's this brown station wagon. And it was the same brown, it might not have been a station wagon, but some big honking car, a Lincoln or something. And I look out the window, and it appeared to be the car of my aunt and uncle from South Carolina. And I'm thinking, unless they drove overnight to get here, I don't know who that is. So I thought maybe it was a bird or something, and I went back to bed. And about 10 minutes later, my mom came downstairs. And she came upstairs, and she was like, get up, get out of bed. You're not going to believe who's here. So I put my clothes on and go downstairs, open the door, and there stands we called him JL in high school. And he said, well, we're going to get married, so we should probably go out. Now, I had been, as I said, with another guy for 5 years. We'd broken up recently, and I had dated another guy recently in between, but I had also broken up with him. So I said, sure, let's go out. And we did. So anyway, we would go back and forth. He would come here for the summer. I would go there for the summer. He would come here some other time. I went there, back and forth. And in 90 or 91, maybe, I went over for Christmas one year, and he proposed, and we had a big engagement party there. So we moved up the wedding. We planned to get married in April, but the long engagement thing, just don't do long engagements. Not shorter than 6 months, because you can't plan a wedding in 6 months, but a year or more is not a good idea, just being honest, my realistic opinion. So we had both graduated at that point. I had a job in New York City in advertising. His dream was to be a stockbroker. But he didn't get a stockbroking job right away. He worked in Philadelphia with his friend, who was one of his soccer coaches, I think. And he lived in Philly, I lived in New York, and we would travel back and forth and see each other on the weekends. And ended up moving the date up to January. So long story short, we got married in January, and the night before our wedding, my mom said, you used to write in your diary a lot when you were a teenager. Why don't you look back and see what you wrote about him on the day you met him? So we dug out my journals and found them. And I had written in my journal on that day, today I met the man I'm going to marry. And I was right. And 23 years later, we're still married. And we read that journal entry at our reception. the first year of our marriage, he hadn't finished college in Europe, but they let him do his last year correspondence. And so he is, as he is in all parts of life, very diligent. He is the one who goes to Consumer Reports and studies for hours and figures out the best refrigerator. He likes to keep spreadsheets, as do I, but he's even a little more into them than I am. But he was in school, and he's very disciplined. And he would come home from work, we would spend a little time together, and then he would study. So I actually spent a lot of time alone our first year of marriage. And after we'd been married just a few months, I got a job in D.C. and he got a job in Richmond. And so we lived in Fredericksburg and we each commuted out. Only to drive in the car from Fredericksburg to Richmond is about an hour. And to ride on the train, and then the metro, and then the bus, and then have to walk 15 blocks to where my job was, took 2.5 hours each way. So I commuted 5 hours a day. So we would leave the house in the morning at 5. He drove me to the bus station, and I got off work at 3. And by that time, I'd be back to the bus station at the time he'd be home from work. So we didn't get home until 8. We would cook dinner and we would eat it, and he would go study. And so we didn't spend a lot of time. And he was in school, not constantly, but most of all, he got 2 master's degrees. So he was in school a lot and studied a lot, and that was the most difficult thing, I think. We did fine through it. I understood he needed an education and he was moving up, and it was a good thing to do. But it wasn't what I thought it would be, because we didn't have the luxury of spending a lot of time together. And that was hard.
So out of that experience, what advice would you give to people guys in the same situation?
Well, I think the obvious answer is don't get married until you're done with school, but this day and age, that's not really possible because so many people get their MBAs. And not everybody wants to wait until they're 28 to get married or however old they are. But being intentional about making time together is very important. And if you don't do that, it isn't going to happen. And if you don't make time to build your marriage, it is not going to last. And so no matter how busy you are, you have to be intentional about making time for each other.
What role did church play in your early life?
I was in church probably the second Sunday of my life, and can't remember a time when we were at church or were not at church. Even when we weren't home, we camped a lot. We went to the church services at the campground. When we traveled out of town to relatives' houses, we would often go to church with them. There was a time in my life in college when I didn't go to church as much, and part of that was because I worked the breakfast shift at a deluxe hotel, and we had to be in at 4 a.m. So church was hard to make. But otherwise, I've been involved in church for all of my 47 years, and when we had children, Jay and I, we got very serious about it, and now we're both very involved.
So what makes you feel most like you?
What makes me feel most like me is just to be real with people. You know, I'm not a super optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I just need to be honest. And so, if a friend asks me, well, some advice, I'm not going to offer advice if they didn't ask, unless it's something that I think they need to be held accountable for and maybe they don't realize it. But I'm not going to walk up and say, oh, you're having a bad hair day. But if they ask me, which dress do you think looks better? I'm going to be honest about which one. I'm not going to tell them the answer that I think they want to hear. I just don't do that. So I guess a big personality trait for me is just that I'm a realist. I give people honest answers. I believe in being honest, but I try to do it in a loving way so that they don't get mad about the fact that I was just honest. And any friend of mine that you will ask will tell you that. And many of them come to me for advice because they know they're going to hear the truth, and it's not going to be handy-coded.
Where do you think you get your sense of humor from?
I have a very dry sense of humor. I think I get it from my dad, but I have a very different sense of humor as my dad. My dad tells jokes. I don't tell jokes. I think I'm more witty than funny. Like, I'll have good comebacks to things, or I'll say something that you might not pick up on right away. I'm sort of dry with my humor. So I definitely get that from my dad. Not that my mom can't be funny, but when you're describing my mom, you would not say, funny would not be the first thing that comes out of your mind.
You could describe your personality in your own words. How would you?
I would describe my personality sort of by using the Myers-Briggs scale, if any of you are familiar with that. But I'm an E, which means extrovert, but just barely. I'm an extrovert in the sense that I'm not afraid to talk to people. I'll talk to a perfect stranger. I don't feel the need to talk to every stranger I walk by. But if someone comes up and asks me a question, I don't get anxious about talking to them. F is a feeler. I'm pretty good about having a feeling about whether something is right or wrong, or someone is honest or dishonest or genuine. I'm a thinker in that I don't make haphazard decisions. I'm not particularly big on research. If I'm going to buy a new fridge, I want to know it's a good one, but I'm not going to spend hours in the Consumer Reports figuring out what the best one is. So I just, intuitively, I feel things. And I'm a judger, which is probably not the best personality trait to have, but I do have a tendency to be judgmental, and it's something I have to work on every day. And I do work on it every day. So that's me in a 4-letter word, TJ, or personality.
Which qualities do you get from your parents, and which qualities that you have are different from both of them?
Okay. The qualities that I get from my parents that make me alike or different from them, at least for my dad's sake, is he lives to karaoke. And I would not karaoke. That's not to say that I haven't karaokeed maybe once or twice in my life, but to get up in front of strangers and sing is not something that I see myself doing. And that's a little bit ironic because I've been a singer since I was a little kid. I sang in church often. I went to college as a music major. Singing brings me joy, but karaoke does not. Explain that one to me, I don't know, but that's how I'm different from my dad. As for my mom, she is a bit of a worrier, and she's much more of a worrier now than she used to be. I don't remember her being as much of a worrier when I was young. She was the parent that, we didn't have cell phones, first of all, so you couldn't contact your kids. They told you dinner's at 6, you were home at 6. And where you were between after school and 6, she wasn't worried about. As a grandparent, she wants to know where the grandchildren are all the time, and she's constantly worried about them. So she's become more of a worrier the older she gets. And maybe that's normal, maybe I'll be that way too, but I don't see myself as a worrier. And collectively, both of my parents are very generous. They've been generous with their money, they're generous with their time, just about anything. And I strive to be a generous person because I've been very blessed and not everyone is. And so my husband and I try to exhibit generosity in many ways. And that's how I think that's one trait that I think I got from both of them.
Can you describe your experience going through lymphoma as a child?
Yes. When I was first diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, which is a type of lymphoma, I was 12. And I was sick for several weeks. And we went to the doctor, and I had a lump in my throat, and I had a fever a lot, and just didn't feel well. Would come home from school and collapse on the couch, and just generally didn't feel well. So my mom took me to the doctor. They thought I had cat scratch fever. They put me on a antibiotic. After a round of antibiotic, I wasn't better. Was running a fever. Same symptoms, back to the doctor, antibiotic. So there used to be this magazine, I think it still exists, that was either called Teen Beat or Tiger Beat, I can't remember. And there was an article in there written by a girl who had Hodgkin's disease. And she described her symptoms, and it was every symptom that I had. So I asked my mom to take me back to the doctor. And I took in the magazine article, and I said, "This is what I have." And he said, "Oh, honey, we haven't seen a case of that in 15 years. And I said to him, "Well, it's about time you saw another one. Do you want me to biopsy you just to make sure?" And I said, "Yes." And he did, and it was Hodgkin's disease. So after a few minor scares in between, other lumps places, which were all benign. When I was pregnant with my first child, which was when I was 29, I had a mole on my back. And I went to the dermatologist, and she didn't want to operate on me because I was pregnant, so she just scraped it off. And to stop the bleeding, she used something that I don't know if they even use anymore. It's called silver nitrate. Well, I happened to be allergic to silver nitrate, thankfully, and I developed this spot on my back that was like the size of a quarter, and it looked like tar, and it needed to come out. So they put me under a mild sedation and took out the spot, and lo and behold, under the spot was a tumor. So they took out the tumor and sent it away to the laboratory, and a week later, whatever, they called the results that it was a different kind of cancer that was caused from the radiation from my Hodgkin's disease. So they wanted to go back in, get more margin, just make sure they got all of it, which they did, and they got all of it, and it was benign, and that was pretty much the end of it. It was over in a couple weeks. Fast forward till I'm 47, so however many years that is after 29, I started having back pain, and I went to the doctor and thought they were going to give me a muscle relaxer or something like that. And he said, well, let me just do a chest x-ray while you're here. So I did a chest x-ray, didn't see anything. Thought I was fine. A couple days later, I get a call back, and the doctors always send the x-rays to another doctor for a second opinion, and they send it to like a serious hospital radiologist. Anyway, they found a chest tumor. And so they did a CAT scan on me to, just verify that it was there. And then they said there's about a 20% chance that lung tumors, which is what it was, a lung tumor, also caused by the first radiation, can metastasize to the brain. There's about a 20% chance. So I had a scan of my brain, and sure enough, there was a metastasis, but it was a really small one. So I was referred to a brain surgeon who removed the brain tumor, and then I had a radiation procedure, and the brain tumor, they got all of it, and I don't expect that to come back. So now I only have, well, no, not now. Then I only had a lung tumor. So I met with my oncologist, we came up with a plan, and started chemo. They decided I shouldn't have any more radiation because of how much I'd had as a child. And having too much radiation can kill you faster than the cancer. So I had my first round of radiation, and they were 3 weeks apart, my chemo. I had my first round of chemo, and they were 3 weeks apart. And on the third week, I got really sick. I had a high fever and no energy, and having trouble breathing, and my heart rate went up to like 138. So I went to the doctor, they admitted me, put me in the hospital. All new scans. And somehow in those 3 weeks, the tumor had metastasized to my other lung, my spine, my kidney, and my adrenal gland. And my prognosis suddenly went from, we can probably fix this, to, we're not sure what's going to happen. And this was devastating news. And the difference between all three of these is that when you're 12 and you have cancer, 12-year-olds don't die of cancer. You don't really worry about dying, first of all. You're not responsible for anyone. You don't have children. You don't have to pay bills. You don't have anything to worry about except for just getting better. So I don't remember being particularly worried about it. When I had it as a 29-year-old and happened to be pregnant, then suddenly have yourself and your baby to worry about. But when you're 47 and you have two teenagers, one of which is about to leave for college, and the other one is about to start high school, and a husband who is your best friend and has been your husband for 23 years, then you have the double whammy of worrying about your own life and watching your family suffer. And that is what I find most difficult about cancer this time compared to the other times.
How did you react when you first learned about the cancer diagnosis?
I was in shock. when I learned that I had cancer, because the week before I went to the doctor, I was working out 4 times a week. I had lots of energy, other than my back pain, which, a Tylenol and a heating pad fixed. I really wasn't thinking that there was any problem, and I was just in shock. And then 2 days later to be hit with, oh, well, you have a brain tumor too, that was just, double whammy. And the thing that I hated about it most was having to deliver the news to my parents, because they lost 2 children before me as infants. And I don't want them to bury a 3rd child.
What's helped you to be strong?
What helped me to be strong was that it seemed like every doctor's appointment that I went to, somebody, some stranger, said something to me that was like directly from God. I remember the first time I went to see my oncologist. Never met her. She walks in my room. I'm sitting on the exam table. And she comes in and she grabs my hands and she said, I don't know where you get your strength from, but my strength comes from the Lord. And I want you to know that this doctor is used by God to heal people. I go out of the appointment with some prescriptions. I go to the pharmacy. New pharmacist, never met me, never met him. I hand him my prescription. He knows from the medicine what it is that I have. And he says, listen to me. Do not lose hope. I know things are bad now, but one day you're going to come back here and tell me how much better you are. And it was like everywhere I went, every procedure I had, every operation, something, I won't say weird, but just a God thing happened. I had a procedure where I had to be put to sleep. And when I woke up, the nurse came in and she said, a doctor wants to talk to you. You don't know him, but he wants to come in and pray with you. Is that okay? And I said, sure. And I'm thinking, who is this? Anyway, the doctor came in, and he happens to go to a friend of ours' church. And they had put us on their prayer chain. And he recognized my name because he was the doctor that found the lung tumor that the first doctor had sent over. And I thought that was so cool that he put my name together, and he happened to say, hey, I know who that is, and had the boldness to come in and ask if he could pray with me. And, despite the fact that I didn't want cancer in the first place, had he not found the tumor, we wouldn't know I had one, and I would have just kept progressing. And there's just been so many things like that are not random. They're just not random. And that has really helped me through. I've had many challenges as well as triumphs through this experience. The challenge is to have a good attitude, to try to stay positive, and not just positive, but hopeful. And not just hopeful, but believing that God's promises are true and holding on to them. And I struggle with that every day. And I know that the Lord has the power to heal me, and that He can. I also know that He chooses not to heal some people. And there's a tension there that is hard to reconcile, especially when it doesn't look like He's working on it. And so, trusting that His plan is perfect and that everything works together for our good for those who love Him is a daily challenge, and it's as much mental as it is spiritual, and it's something that you constantly deal with. The triumphs are the loads of people who are serving us. And you have people coming out of the woodwork to tell you how much you've meant to them and how inspiring you are, and helping with food and putting prayer chains together and dropping off just random items that you would not think to take someone who was sick, but have been so helpful. You know, people offering rides to the children because I couldn't drive after the brain surgery, and the company that my husband works for has been awesome with our insurance, and we are so thankful for our group of friends that we have right now, and we really didn't realize how much they care, and that has been just very uplifting. Faith has played an integral role in not only this journey, but in my life. Specifically to this journey, you have to have a viewpoint, okay? And if you're a person who believes that, you know, we're not created, we're here by some random accident, and no one's in control, I don't know how you can have any hope. And every day I'm thankful for that, because if I was in the situation that I'm in now, which is dire, and I didn't have the promises that God makes in His Word, there is no way I could make it through a day, because I believe that the people who die the fastest are the ones who don't have any hope, because you have to have a reason to live. You have to have a will to live. And if you don't have that, what's the point? And that's what keeps me going. Another of my favorite verses is from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and it's verses 9 through 12. And I believe it's important to help people, because the Bible talks about how helping people is what makes them successful. And these verses say, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity the one who falls down and has no one to help. Also, if 2 lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Although one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So you have an individual, and you may or may not have God on your side, because you may not be a believer. But just to have 2, you have to have a friend. And I enjoy helping people because I want to be in that rope, which ropes are made of 3 strands. And I help others because I would want someone to help me when I needed help. And I feel like I've been so blessed that if I can provide a need to someone else, sometimes that need is sacrificial, or the help is sacrificial, and sometimes the help is something simple. But in order to have 3 strands, you need an individual, a friend, and God. And without those 3 strands, things fall apart much easier. I think my most personal, or my biggest personal achievement, is kind of counterintuitive. Because what I consider my biggest personal achievement to be is that prior to having children, I worked full-time. And when I got pregnant with Bauer, I had a great job. I loved my job, but I knew that I didn't want to work full-time. And so I approached my boss when I was like 3 months pregnant, which no one does. Usually people don't tell their boss they're pregnant until they can't hide it anymore, because they don't want them to find some reason to get rid of them. And I came up with a PowerPoint and how if I worked this many hours, we could structure my pay this way and my benefits this way, and had the whole plan worked out. Presented it to my boss and the HR people, and they agreed. We'll try it for 90 days. If it works, we'll keep it going. If it doesn't work, you can either decide to come back full-time or you can leave. Fine. So, the day before my maternity leave starts, somebody in HR was out of town, out of the country, and had not signed off on my form. And he wasn't going to be back for like 4 months. So I was going to have to go back full-time until he was home. And I had already set up a part-time babysitter. Who the heck is going to keep my kid the other 2 days? But what other choice did I have? So, fortunately, my in-laws were in town when the baby was born, and they offered to keep the baby. And then my next-door neighbor didn't work, and she offered to keep the baby some, and then, so it worked itself out. And then after 3 weeks, we had a big layoff at work, and I got laid off. And I was devastated because, as I said, I love my job and I'm good at my job. I was good at my job. And I can honestly say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I got to stay home. I started my own business, and I've had that business now for 18 years. And that was building that business and being able to prove to myself that I could do it was a bigger personal achievement than holding down a job, even one that I loved as much as I did. My biggest spiritual achievement had to do with Ethan when he was born. And I was having a normal pregnancy and went in my 20th week, or whatever week you have your ultrasound. And they found some flags for Down syndrome for him. So we were devastated. And it was a Wednesday night, and I sang in the choir at church. And I'd been a Christian for years, since I was 8. And I was weeping just all night, couldn't pull it together. And I remember we were singing, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." And Ethan kicked for the first time while I was singing that hymn. And I realized that whether Ethan was born healthy or whether Ethan was born with Down syndrome, that God is still faithful, regardless. And that was huge. So we had picked out a name for him, and they had already warned us to have the heart doctor standing on by, because he on standby because he might not make it, and they give you the worst case scenario. But when he was born, he came out perfectly healthy. He was born a little early, so he was small, but we changed his name to Ethan because it meant powerful. And that was a big spiritual changer for my life. My hopes for my family's future. For Bauer, the hope that's nearest in the future is that he would narrow down his list of schools that he wants to apply to for college, that he would have confidence in the ones that he should apply to, and that he would be satisfied with where he gets in and would make a decision about that is prayed over, and that he would just pick a school where he's comfortable and not regret not going somewhere else, especially after my school experience. I want him to not feel pressured to compare himself to where other people get in, and just to enjoy the experience. For Ethan, who is about to get his learner's permit later this year, and I think I worry about him driving more than Bauer, because Bauer's a firstborn, and firstborns are usually rule followers, and he was always our safety man. He had to have fire ladders, for all the windows. And Ethan, on the other hand, if he could get upstairs in the guest room where there was a roof, right, and you could walk out the window onto a roof, and if it was too quiet upstairs, I would know something's wrong and go upstairs and find him and his other 4-year-old friend sitting on the roof, because he had no fear of anything. So I hope that he makes it through high school making some wiser decisions than he has been known to make in the past. For Jay, my hope is that we can grow old together, and that we can find some activity that we enjoy doing together. And he would like that to be golf. And I really think golf is probably the most boring thing one could choose to do. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work out. I guess I'll golf with him if he will do something with me that he might not want to do. One thing we do enjoy doing together is volunteering. And I think we will probably do a lot of that. We'll pick a nonprofit and we will maybe take one day a week. We've also talked about, once the kids are gone, just moving somewhere and being missionaries. And I would love to see that happen. So those are my wishes for the three of them.
Tina, what's your biggest fear and concern right now?
Without a doubt, my health. I mentioned earlier that I have lung cancer, and then I had a brain tumor, and then they operated, and I now have lung cancer, and I was recently in the hospital, and in the matter of 3 months since I found out I had cancer, even 2 months, not only has the cancer gotten better, it's gotten worse and has spread. And my prognosis is not good. Although I did get good news today about a possible clinical trial that I can join. So my biggest fear is that even though I understand that God can heal me, and that He has the power to heal me, that He doesn't heal everyone. And if He chooses not to heal me, my fears are, first of all, that my children will become angry. And we've talked about this, and they say they will not become angry, but I think it's natural for someone to be angry. And I never really understood that, because God doesn't bring cancer. Satan brings cancer. But you will never hear someone say, "I'm so angry at Satan." They are always mad at God. And God does not bring bad things. He may allow bad things because He knows the future, and He knows what would happen if He did not intervene. For instance, He may decide to take me out in 2 months, which to a human would seem like a very bad thing. But He may know that if He doesn't take me out, I'm going to suffer for years. So He may be sparing me years of suffering by taking me to heaven after 2 months or 4 months or however long. And so I have to recognize that if He's choosing something that I would not choose, that there's a reason for it. And whether or not I like the reason or I understand the reason is not the point. And so I don't want my children to be angry with God. It's for my husband. I love my husband. I want to grow old with my husband. And the thought that he would be left here alone, and he is an introvert, makes me sad. But even now, I'm praying that if God chooses not to heal me, that He would find another wife for Jay who would make him happy and satisfy him, and he could live with her without guilt, and that our sons would accept her, even though she may be very different from me, and respect the fact that their father deserves a soulmate. And I have no control over that, so I have to trust God for that. But it's just scary to think that you aren't going to see your children graduate, and you aren't going to meet your daughters-in-law that you've prayed for years, and you're not going to meet your grandchildren, and you're not going to grow old with your husband, and you're going to leave your family grieving. And right now, that's my biggest fear. And I have to will myself not to think that way every day. You don't just decide one day, I'm going to beat this, and God's going to heal me, and you're done. It is a daily battle. And you have to go through the same process every day. And that's a very difficult journey. So right now, my biggest fear is just that I can keep that up, and they can find a cure, or at least something relatively manageable for me. And that the entire time I would point others to Christ, whether I live or die. And that's difficult to do on a daily basis.